Mr. Travilla, if you could please stand and raise your right hand. Mr. Robert Travilla, do you solemnly swear, under the penalty of perjury, that the testimony you shall give in the matter at hand shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, please be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Counsel?
Mr. Chairman, I request a chair at the table that I may accompany and advise Mr. Travilla as he testifies.
Thank you, Counsel. You understand our rules correctly? You have to be recognized if you're going to speak and so forth. Did you read our rules of procedure?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Test. Okay. Good. Okay. Is there an objection, members?
No objection.
Thank you, members. Ms. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, members. And we're going to move forward. And with that, the chair recognizes Representative Attal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Travilla. For the record, please state your name and the village in which you reside in.
Good morning. My name is Robert Cabanas Travilla, Gualaray.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Good morning again. Before we ask you any substantive legal questions about the Boost program and your involvement, we have some preliminary questions. Is that okay with you?
Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Kem, Exhibit 1, subpoena ducis tecum, and Exhibit 2, subpoena ad testificandum, please. Mr. Travilla, I'm showing you on the screen, and I believe it was provided to you as well. Exhibit 1, the subpoena ducis tecum, issued on November 17, 2023, and served upon you on November 20, 2023 by House Sergeant at Arms Pedro Toay. And Exhibit 2, the subpoena ad testificandum, issued on January 17, 2024, and accepted on your behalf by your private counsel at the time, Kongne, on January 17, 2024. Is that correct?
Yes.
Cam exhibit, please, declaration. For the record, we received this document dated December 14, 2023. This declaration attests that you have no additional documents to provide with respect to the two items listed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. To be clear, you do not have any additional communications to include emails, text messages, or WhatsApp messages between you and William Castro.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. You do not have any invoices, proof of payments, or any documents concerning subcontracts used for booze other than what you have already provided this committee. Is that correct?
On the advice of counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Thank you for that, Mr. Travilla, and you have that right. But also under 1 CMC 1306, a person shall be in contempt if the person fails or refuses to answer any relevant questions or refuses to furnish any relevant book, paper, or other document subpoenaed by or on behalf of an investigating committee. You are aware of that, Mr. Travilla?
Yes.
Thank you for that, Mr. Travilla. When you appeared before this committee on February 20, 2024, you and your counsel, Mr. Jet Ori, provided additional documents that were not included in your original production. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And as you appear today, do you have any other documents that are responsive to the subpoena ducis tecum?
On the advice of my counsel, I declined to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Mr. Travilla, are you here today pursuant to the subpoena ad testificandum that was labeled as House Special Committee Subpoena Number 4 that was issued on the 17th of January 2024 and served by House Sergeant at Arms Pedro Tuay and accepted on your behalf by your private counsel Conne on January 17, 2024?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Travilla. Mr. Travilla, please tell us about your post-secondary educational background and professional credentials, please.
I was accepted to 2 colleges in my senior year, but my parents couldn't afford me a post-secondary education.
How about professional credentials?
Professional credentials started when I was 15 years old. Worked at my uncle's tattoo shop, Megavision. And when I turned 19, I worked for the Department of Homeland Security. Did that for 10 years. I was a behavior detection officer. And shortly after that, I started a business. And in 2015, I started another company. And that's what led me here today.
So the 2015 is which business? Sorry. And the business before that.
Actually, if we're going to go in detail, I started my business ventures in 2006.
2006?
Yes.
Which is after Homeland, right?
No, it's actually, I was
During
during the time I was,
What's that business, Mr. Travilla?
it was clothing and graphic design.
Okay. And the name of the business?
Sabay Company.
Okay. How about in the 2015? Well, which business was that?
So that was Tribe Marianas.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Do you have a degree or any certification in marketing or advertising?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Mr. Chairman, I yield my time for now.
Thank you, Rep. Atto. Any chair recognizes Rep. Angelo Camacho.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you guys for coming in today. Just gonna move right into the questions. What is Nonstop Corporation?
Nonstop is a premier marketing agency specializing in digital marketing, creative branding, business consultation, and merchant services.
Thank you. And when was Nonstop established in the CNMI?
It was officially established in 2022.
I think we have the exhibit. believe it's Exhibit 4. You guys established on August 8, 2022, correct?
Yes.
All right. And what are the goods and or services that Nonstop provides to its clients?
We specialize in digital marketing, creative branding, business consultation, and merchant services.
Thank you. What is the legal status of Nonstop in the CNMI? Is it a foreign or domestic corporation?
Well, it was established in Guam, but we do have our proper licenses here in the CNMI.
Thank you. And if you don't mind me asking, who are the principal stakeholders of Nonstop?
Myself and Selena Sapp.
Thank you. What is the organizational structure of Nonstop?
Congressman, could you please clarify that question?
Kind of like an organizational chart. Who's, for example, are you the president of the company, or
Oh.
and going down?
Yeah, Selena Sapp, president, and myself, vice president.
And no other staff, correct?
That's the organizational structure, Congressman.
All right, thank you. Does Nonstop have a valid CNMI business license here on Saipan?
Yes.
Okay, and Cam, if you don't mind, can you pull up Exhibit 5, please? And I see on this business license, you obtained it on August 29, 2022, correct?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And then what are your roles and responsibilities at Nonstop?
My official title is I'm the director of sales and marketing of the company.
I'm almost done here, so just a couple more questions. How many individuals are employed with Nonstop in the CNMI?
Currently, we do not have any employees besides me and Selena, but previously we did have employees.
And if you don't mind, how many employees back then?
I believe it was 4.
4. And moving to the next question, how many individuals were employed with Nonstop on Guam?
None.
None. Okay. And last question. For the CNMI, your employees that were employed in the CNMI, what are their names and positions?
None.
This was during the time when you had the 4 employees.
I wasn't in charge of that department, so I can't recall.
Okay, thank you. Hey, you for now, Chairman.
Yeah. You,
Yes.
Rep.
You, Chairman. Yes.
Rep.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, Mr. Travilla, thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate you here answering our questions. And thank you for being so forthcoming. We appreciate that. I just wanted to, because earlier you mentioned you had 4 employees working for Nonstop Corporation in the CNMI. Do you recall what their names were and what positions they held in your company?
I really don't recall because, like I mentioned to Congressman, that wasn't my department.
Thank you. And since there are only 2 of you, correct, under Nonstop, that's you and Miss Sapp, would she know the 4 employees that were working under your company?
Yes.
Thank you. I yield.
You Rep Probes. Okay, Rep Atal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sapp, just to follow up on Nonstop Guam, you had mentioned that there's no employees from Nonstop Guam.
That's correct.
Okay, so but Nonstop was created in Guam and was a foreign entity when it was bridged out to the CNMI, correct?
That's correct.
And that was the way for you to be able to get your Nonstop CNMI moving, correct? Meaning it's not a domestic company. You open in the CNMI as a foreign company to transition into a domestic company here in the CNMI.
Well, initially the company was started in Guam just because of the fact that we wanted to do work in both islands, you know.
Okay.
I mean, if you do know the background between me and my partner, I'm from Saipan, she's from Guam, and we have businesses on both islands.
So Nonstop was created in Guam, but I'm just going back because you had
Oh, okay.
mentioned that there was no employees in Guam.
That's correct.
So who was Nonstop Guam?
Me and Selena.
So you guys were the employees, Nonstop Guam.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make that clear. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just a follow up before I recognize Rep Dago, Rep Probes.
Thank you. And since we're on these foundation questions, Nonstop Guam, Nonstop Corporation in Guam, do you have companies that are under that branch? Like any companies that branch out under it, cosmetics or marketing or anything else?
No, so that company is strictly that company. And like I mentioned to Congressman, me and my partner have other companies also on Guam and in CNMI.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Rep Probes. Chair recognizes Rep Dago.
Good morning, Mr. Travilla. Thank you for appearing before this committee. So when did you first hear about the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I declined to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Duly noted. From whom did you hear about the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I declined to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Duly noted. Did Nonstop apply for Boost?
On the advice of my counsel, I declined to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Duly noted. Did any of your companies apply for Boost?
On the advice of my counsel, I declined to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Were any companies that you have a stake in applied for Boost?
On the advice of my counsel, I declined to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Noted. Was there a request for proposal or a request for quotation that was issued for the marketing of the Boost program that you responded to?
On the advice of my counsel, I declined to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Duly noted. So who initiated the conversation between Bank of Saipan and Nonstop for the marketing of the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC, 1307C, and the Fifth Amendment.
Noted. How was Nonstop selected to receive the marketing contract for the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC, 1307C, and the Fifth Amendment.
Duly noted. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Dago. Before we move on, just to clarify, Mr. Tavila, you understand that this is not a criminal proceeding, and this committee is only tasked to investigate the program, which you have handled. So, are you still going to invoke your Fifth Amendment rights? Is it a specific question or a subject, certain subject?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. You were the contractor of this public funds, correct?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Mr. Travilla, we have questions regarding receipts, invoice, employees, accounting, all of these topics that you should be able to testify to. Are you refusing to answer any of these questions to?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Are you refusing to answer your question because you believe your response to the question posed to you might implicate you or your partner in a crime?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Mr. Travilla, you do understand that you cannot plead fifth to questions that are not directly or indirectly likely to incriminate you.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
And do you understand that you cannot have a blanket assertion and may not, and that you may have a good faith reason of bias or basis? Sorry, let me restrict that. Take that back. I'll move forward. Short recess. move to, I believe it was Rep. Um, John Paul, Chair recognizes Rep. Probst.
Thank you, Chair. And before we begin, Sarge, can you give copies of the document, this one? Do we have the two? Okay, sure. Here. Pass. Okay, for Mr. Two copies, please. One for Mr. Travilla and one for Mr. Hori. Thank you. Okay. This will be listed as Exhibit 24. And just, if you can hand it to him, please. What's going on? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, our LA, is handing that over. Mr. Travilla, I'd like you to look at that document that has just been handed to you, sir. And Cam, can we go ahead and pull up Exhibit 24? Let me see what's on the screen, and I'll tell you which one to go to. Can you? Yeah, just pick one and let's see. Okay, that says, yeah. Can you zoom in on it a little bit so people can see it? Okay, all right. Thank you. Mr. Travilla, earlier in your testimony, we asked you about the declaration that you made for Exhibit 3. Cam, I'm sorry, could you also pull up Exhibit 3? My apologies. And then we'll go back to that one. My apologies. Okay. And in Exhibit 3, you had mentioned that you didn't have any WhatsApp messages between you and Mr. Will Castro. We asked you again to be clear, you don't have any additional communications to include emails, text messages, or WhatsApp messages between you and William Castro. And you said you do not have such documents. And that was your signed declaration that you did not have these documents. The documents that you see, and Cam, can we pull back Exhibit 24? That's your testimony, that's your declaration? That you do not have any in your... Mr. Travilla, can you tell me what this is from the copies that you have in front of you and what's on the screen right now?
On the declaration, I put I do not have it in my possession. So if you obtained this prior to that, then, but at the time I really don't have.
Mr. Travilla, one of the things that we had asked specifically in the subpoena ducis tecum was communications between you and Mr. Will Castro. You had not just furnished it, you made a declaration that you signed that said you do not have any such documentation. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what are we looking at right here?
On the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC, 1307C, and the Fifth Amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Travilla, for the record, what we were looking at is a WhatsApp group chat that says right there on the screen, if you look at it, and you do have a copy furnished, it says here, Rob Travilla created group Boost Workforce. Rob Travilla added, and he added different members. Half a day, guys. Scroll up, please. Cam, go up. There's a person there that says from Chief. He says, awesome. And the photo with the person's name, Chief, is that Mr. Will Castro, who said awesome and responded to you, who you included in this chat group? Mr. Travilla?
On the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
For all intent and purposes, and from what we have seen, that is a photo of him, and it says Chief. Is Chief for Chief of Staff of the Governor? Is that what he's called? His title?
On the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Okay, can we scroll down a little bit more, Cam, and keep it zoomed in? And it says Selena apostrophe S, half a day. Who is Selena? Is that your partner in Nonstop Corporation? The president of Nonstop Corporation? Is that a different Selena?
On the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Okay, can we go to another? We've gone through that. There's how many other? There's 4. Yeah, so let's go to another one. We've gone through that one. Let's pull out the next one. Any of them. Let's see. That one, yeah, the members. We have you. Is that you? The admin right there, Mr. Travilla, is that you? That says right there? And is that the chief of staff? Will Castro?
On the advice of my counsel, I decline to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Thank you. And can you scroll, continue to scroll down, see what else is on this? Okay, that's created October 3, 2022. This group chat was created on, just for the record, according to this document that we have, on October 3, 2022. Did you create this chat group on WhatsApp on October 3, 2022, sir?
I decline to answer based on 1 CMC 1307C and the Fifth Amendment.
Cam, can you continue to scroll down? Let this down as it goes? Okay, you can cancel out that one, and let's go to the next one. There's 4, I believe, right? Can you pull up another one? Okay, can you zoom in on that? Okay. Establishments, that would be great. And then there was a comment made, and then Selena, go down more. And this refers to, can you zoom in on that? Boost, mix, and sip. Zoom in on that. Okay, this is part of your chat, and for Boost, mix, and sip, and that was on Friday, November 4th, 2022. Continue up. Okay, and that was at the Half a Day Roasting Company. Okay, that was Mr. Travilla. This group chat that you created, that has your name on it. Is there a reason why you neglected to give this WhatsApp chat group with communication between you and the chief of staff of the governor? Is there a reason why you did not give it to this body? Yeah, in the meantime, go to the next slide. I'm awaiting your answer, sir, but we'll move to the next slide. Okay. Zoom in on that. Okay. And scroll down a little bit. Okay. Mr. Davila?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Noted. This is, somebody says, do you want me to secure this or make note that we have it? And then Chief, who we've identified as Chief of Staff Will Castro, says, marketing can handle. Your role is to get the workforce people into the community, identify ARPA temp hires, and move them to our partners, and marketing is to cover that, produce ads, etc. Move forward. I need you to manage the actual program on my behalf. You're the workhorse here, darling. I fathom, you execute. Rob and Selena make it shinny. I think he meant shiny. Okay. All right. So, Mr. Travilla, do you acknowledge that this is a chat group that you did in fact create?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, is there a reason why you do not wish to disclose the chats between you and Mr. Will Castro, the Chief of Staff of the from the Office of the Governor? Is there a reason, compelling reason, why you will not share with us this information now that we've established that there was in fact a chat group?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, this committee would like a copy of this entire chat group, that now that we know that it exists. Are you able to furnish to this committee this chat group from start to finish for everything that is in this chat group?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, this already has, we have clear evidence that you have this. Are you sure you do not want to turn this into us, this committee?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
That is your prerogative. That is your right. I just want you to know for the record that we have requested this. And are you saying you are not willing to turn this in to this committee?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Move on. I yield at this point, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. Chair recognizes Rep. John Paul Sablan.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, Mr. Travilla. We're going to continue on the questions on the boost program. A contract was then executed. Please tell us who is this contract is between.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. And it's not between Nonstop and the Sinamay government or the Department of Finance or the Secretary of Finance. Is that correct?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
The date on this general service agreement was originally dated for July 29, 2022. And then it was crossed out and changed to August 8, 2022. Why was there a date change to start the date of the contract?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Cam, can we have Exhibit 7? And Mr. Travilla, if I can have your attention on the screen before you. Did Nonstop begin its marketing service before the effective date on that contract?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, when did you actually start working on marketing the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Was the Bank of Saipan under the Boost marketing program the first marketing client for Nonstop
Corporation in the Sinamay?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
What was the agreed upon amount with respect to this GSA, this General Service Agreement?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, who decided on the 50,000 amount on this GSA for strategic marketing, integrated communications, and project management?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Can you describe in detail what strategic marketing, integrated communications, project management entailed? What were the actual deliverables, Nonstop, your company, provided to the Bank of Saipan in marketing the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
What types of media did Nonstop create and utilize to market the Boost program, Mr. Travilla?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Can you provide any written details, any communication establishing the project management, outlining what was agreed upon between you and Bank of Saipan?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Any further? Chair recognizes Rep. Camacho.
Good morning, Mr. Travilla and Council. This is kind of like a follow-on with what he just asked. So most likely you're gonna answer all of them. These are different questions though. So we start up with, describe what you specifically did for the strategic marketing, integrated communications, project management of the Boost program.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Can you provide storyboards, draft layouts, or communications between you and the Bank of Saipan detailing the strategic marketing, integrated communications, project management you proposed, and what was the agreed upon between you and the Bank of Saipan?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Did you provide strategic marketing, integrated communications, and project management in the production of newspaper ads, brochure ads, digital ads, or flyers?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. We're almost done. Did you subcontract any of the work related to marketing the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Did you subcontract Unis Art Studio, which is Morano's Variety, for any Boost marketing related services?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Did you subcontract the Saipan Tribune for any Boost marketing related services?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Did you subcontract creators, designs, or Mr. Ali Ogo for any Boost marketing related services?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Did you subcontract Greenlight Media Productions for any Boost marketing related services?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Do you have any quotes, written agreements, contracts, invoices, or communications between you and any of these subcontractors?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Did you provide photography and or videography services?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Who did you subcontract to do this work?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Can you provide copies of any of this work for conceptualization to publications?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Can you provide communications on when and how these were approved?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. How many videos did Nonstop produce?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Who did you subcontract to do this work?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Can you provide copies of any of this work from conceptualization to publications?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Can you provide communications on when and how these were approved?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Were social media platforms used in marketing the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. As the marketing contractor responsible for Boost, did you prepare draft layouts or digital pre-production proofs of this work?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Trevilla, for the answers. I yield. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Camacho. Recognize Rep. BJ Atal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Trivilla, are you okay? Do you need a bathroom break? You good?
I'm good.
All right, thank you. We'll move on with more questions. Do you have copies of completed or published media use on any of these social media platforms?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Trevilla. Did you create and control all of the social media platforms related to marketing the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Trevilla. Under the GSA with the Bank of Saipan dated August 8, 2022. Can we pull that up? Was there a time frame or deadline for your marketing services to conclude or end under the Boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Trevilla. In Section 9, can we pull up to Section 9 of the GSA, it states, the contractor will be reimbursed from time to time for reasonable and necessary expenses incurred by the contractor in connection with providing the services. The expenses are print costs and television and commercial advertisements. Did Nonstop invoice the Bank of Saipan for the expenses other than print costs and television and commercial advertisements?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Trevilla. Under Section 10 of the GSA, it states all expenses must be pre-approved by the client. Did the Bank of Saipan pre-approve the expenses that were reimbursed?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Trevilla. On September 15, 2022, Nonstop entered into a second general service agreement for Phase 2 of the Boost marketing program. What is the difference between the scope of work in GSA 1 and GSA 2?
On the advice of my
Exhibit,
counsel, I invoke my
8.
Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
So for the record, that's Exhibit 8, which is the Phase 2. Thank you again, Mr. Trevilla. Was there a time frame or deadline for the second GSA to conclude or end under the boost program?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Trevilla. On November 15, 2022, Nonstop proposed a third general service agreement, GSA, with the Bank of Saipan for Phase 3 of the Boost marketing program. What is the difference between the scope of work in GSA 3 versus GSA 1 and 2?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your
That's,
question.
Exhibit 9, Cam, please bring that up. Yeah, Phase 3, right? Just for the record, so that our viewing public and Mr. Trevilla has that before him. Thank you again, Mr. Trevilla. The Bank of Saipan did not sign the GSA 3, yet Nonstop invoiced the Bank of Saipan for $24,500 for 50% of the unsigned contract amount. What's Nonstop paid by the Bank of Saipan for this?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you again, Mr. Trevilla. And again, I will repeat, under 1 CMC 1306, a person shall be in contempt if the person fails or refuses to answer any relevant question or fails to refute or refuses to furnish any relevant book, paper, or other document subpoenaed by or on behalf of the investigating committee. Is that clear?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
And that is your right. Thank you, Mr. Trevilla. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Atto. Any further? Chair recognizes Marissa Flores.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Trevilla, for being present today. Would you say you have a good memory?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Can you, do you remember the first tribe design you ever made?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
And I'm going to ask one more question before I get to my line of questionings. Do you remember when your first child was born?
Yes.
You do? Okay, so you have a good memory.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth
Okay.
Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
All right. So as we looked at the chat, it was created on October 2nd of 2022 in the WhatsApp chat that was actually put up on the screen. Who came up with the idea for the Boost Expo and Gala at the Saipan Road Resort on October 25th, 2022? Kim?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. So, in your GSA agreement with the Bank of Saipan, you would have to turn in invoices in order to get reimbursed. Am I right? It's a yes or no question.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. So as if you could take a look at the screen, you notice that Nonstop Corporation had invoiced John Arroyo of the Bank of Saipan in the amount of $24,500. Client services, it says on the list of description, strategic marketing, integrated communications, project management in support of Boost workforce development, which is compliant to your contract with Bank of Saipan, correct?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, sir.
Rep Flores, short recess, short recess. All right, we are back. The Rep Marissa Flores too has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry for the short interruption, Mr. Travilla. Obviously, we go back and forth. You might not remember where we're at, so my apologies for that. On October 25th, and this we're talking about the Boost Gala, on October 25th, 2022, Cam, you were charged an invoice $15,912 by the World Resort Hotel. Do you remember this? It's a yes or no question.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. So for $15,912, can you explain to me what you did, what your services were for this particular invoice that you had charged?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and
Okay.
respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Do you remember how many rooms you charged that day?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Can you tell me where you were on October 25th, 2022?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your
Okay,
question.
well, let me tell you, on October 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, you were actually present there because you signed off on the invoice. Now, are you saying now for the record that you weren't there?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
I would assume you were there. Okay. Who planned and coordinated this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain why certain guests were at the? Let me go back. Let me rephrase that. Can you tell me who Vince Guerrero was? That was in a specific room number. But can you tell me who that was?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment
Okay.
privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
All right.
Rep Flores,
Yes.
hold on, because we need to
Follow the
clarify
questions. I know. I
some-
apologize. I'm getting there as we go. My apologies. I think I remember more than what I'm supposed to actually be saying. I'm a little excited. Sorry. Okay. Who were the event designers and decorators for the event, Mr. Travilla?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Can you explain why they were paid $20,000 for a single day event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Who did the event stage, sound, and lighting, sir?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, sir. Can you explain why they were paid $5,000 for this service? And let's look at the SWR. Cam Exhibit 13, please. And we're back at Exhibit 13. Okay. Can you explain why they were paid $5,000 for the stage equipment?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Did Nonstop purchase or provide beer or alcohol for this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Do you have the exhibit in front of you, Exhibit 13?
Yes.
Okay. Did Nonstop book hotel rooms at the Saipan Road Resort on or around the time of this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
How many hotel rooms at the Saipan Road Resort did Nonstop book? Cam?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
How many hotel rooms at the Saipan Road Resort did Nonstop book?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay, well, I believe there
Rep.
was.
Marissa, sorry. Rep. Probst has a clarifying question. Okay, please proceed.
And I'm sorry, I was sidetracked there. And you are, at the advice of your counsel, you don't want to answer that question. Am I right?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your
Okay.
question.
Okay. I believe there's a total of 16 rooms. Okay, all right. On October 23rd, 2022, there were 6 rooms booked at the Saipan World Resort. Why did Nonstop need 6 rooms 2 days before the event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Mr. Travilla, look over this exhibit. Cam, is it there? Okay. I will ask a name and please tell us who this person is and what the role was in the relation to this event. Traviel Boert. Traviel Boert.
Sorry, Congresswoman, was that a question?
Yes, it is a question.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Sharp Paris.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Nakamoto Dennis.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Takano Robert.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Alianza Jesse.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Cam. On October 24, 2022, there were 7 rooms booked at the Saipan World Resort. Rooms for the 6 listed above, and additional room for Chidui Antonio. Who is this person and what is their role in the relation to this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. On October 25th, 2022, there were 12 rooms booked at the Saipan World Resort. Why did Nonstop need 12 rooms?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, look over this exhibit. Please tell us who each person is and what their role was in relation to this event.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. On October 26, 2022, there were still 10 rooms booked at the Saipan World Resort. Why did Nonstop need that many rooms?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. On October 27, there were 6 rooms booked at the Saipan World Resort. Why did Nonstop still need hotel rooms 2 days after the event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
On October 28, there were 2 rooms still booked. Oh, I think at the World Resort. Why did Nonstop still need these rooms after 3 days after the event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. Did Nonstop pay for all these hotel rooms? Yes or no?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
It's a yes or no question.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you, Rep. Flores. Chair recognizes Rep. Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Rep. Flores. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Mr. Travilla. I have a line of questions I'd like to ask you, but I would like to first get to some follow-up questions, if that's okay. Cam, can you pull up the exhibit earlier that showed the amounts for the $10,000 single-day event and the $20,000 single-day event and the $5,000 charge for that was, I believe, you have that exhibit. Was that exhibit 12? Exhibit 12, I believe. Yeah, exhibit 12. Sorry, one moment. Okay. I know. Wait, no, the other one. The one that you were just at. The amounts. Is that? Sorry. Not the one. Sorry. Is it exhibit 11? Sorry, exhibit 11. Sorry. With the amounts that are $10,000 for a single day event, $20,000. Short recess.
the recess, guys. Ed Probst, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and just had some follow-up questions to Rep. Flores. If you can see the screen right here, Mr. Travilla, the Boost Expo and Gala at Saipan World Resort, it was held on October 25, 2022. Was that something that your company came up with to have this gala, or was it from Chief Will Castro?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. And the reason why I'm asking is that there were some big amounts for a one-day event that brought some attention to our committee. One of them, Mr. Travilla, if you look on the screen in front of you, you can see that there was a charge for $5,000, and that's for event stage, sound, and lighting. Mr. Travilla, according to the proposal and the that we saw from World Resort, the stage and the sound equipment was supposed to be free or part of the contract, which means they did not charge that. Who did you pay the $5,000 to for this equipment?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
If it was given free, why would you invoice Bank of Saipan $5,000, sir?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
You've already been paid large sums of money for strategic marketing and program management and other things. And for this one day Boost Expo and Gala, the Saipan World Resort, sir, there is a $10,000 charge for event planning and coordinator. $10,000 for one day. Mr. Travilla, you've been paid large sums of money to market this event, lead this event, you and Ms. Sapp. Who did you hire and who did you pay a whopping $10,000 for a one-day event to plan and coordinate this event, sir?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, do you think this is a large amount of money that was paid for a person to work just basically to put together one day? Because we have asked and we've talked to planners and coordinators, and they all said that is a rather large sum of money for a one-day event. Why was it so much? Why such an exorbitant amount? And who did actually receive this? Was it you or Ms. Sapp that received this $10,000?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to
And
answer
then,
your question.
thank you. And then we have Boost designer, I'm sorry, event designer and decorator, that was paid $20,000 to hire an event designer and decorator for a one-day event at the World Resort. $20,000. Sir, Mr. Travilla, who did you hire to do this work? Who did you pay $20,000 to design and decorate?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
This one single invoice that you billed was $35,000, sir. This is almost twice as much, probably more than twice what World Resort actually charged for the one-day event. Are you aware of that, Mr. Travilla?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Let's move on. I'm sorry, one last question before we do move on. Who authorized you to have all these rooms at the Royal Resort? Who gave you that authorization? And to have 6 or 7 days of people in these rooms? Who gave you that authorization?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Are these personal friends of yours from Guam, the people that were in the hotel, or were they working on this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Moving on. Mr. Chavilla, there's been a few events that the Boost Mix and Sip event, was that part of your strategic marketing?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. There was a Boost Mix and Sip event at the Hoffaday Roasting Company on November 4, 2022. Who came up with the idea for this Boost Mix and Sip event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Did Nonstop invoice the Bank of Saipan for coordinating this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. John Lee, the owner of Hoffaday Roasting Company, has told this committee that he did the event for free. Is that correct?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Did Nonstop charge for this event for anything?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Did Nonstop purchase or provide beer or alcoholic beverages at this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
How about photography and videography for this event? Did Nonstop provide these services for this one event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. Were they subcontracted to provide photography and videography for this for Nonstop? No.
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Did Nonstop bill the Bank of Saipan for these additional services for this mix and sip at the Hoffaday Roasting Company?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
I'm just wondering because we did not notice any invoices for this one particular event. And what made this different from the others?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay. All right. Cam, Exhibit 21, please. We have it. Mr. Travilla, who came up with the idea for the Boost Kahulu mixer at Naked Fish on November 12, 2022? It's on the screen there. Oh, wait. One second. It's invoice 2322. Sorry, Cam. Okay, well, move on. So this was a mixer held on November 12, 2022. Did Nonstop create this event? Did you coordinate this and spearhead it?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Who arranged the talent for this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to
Did
answer.
Nonstop purchase or provide the beer and alcoholic beverages for this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Who was the event coordinator for this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Why was this person paid $2,500 for this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Did Nonstop provide photography or videography for this event?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Mr. Travilla, at this event at Naked Fish, did you run a credit card and purchase several drinks, alcoholic beverages for the governor and his table and others at this event, and then charge it to the Bank of Saipan and got repaid by the Bank of Saipan?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Because we do have a copy of that, and we can pull that up later. Sorry, are we having problems with the internet? So we can come back to that later. But you are aware of this party, this event, that you did purchase drinks, and there's a list of drinks that this committee did see. A lot of shots, beers, whiskey, all kinds of things. And then it was billed as refreshments for guests attending this event. Do you remember that, sir?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Do you think it's fair to run up charges like that and then to just go ahead and pass it on to taxpayers?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Okay, at this point, I yield, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. Any further? Chair recognizes Rep. Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Travilla, before I get to the next question, you are aware under sections 1306 that we, this investigative committee, can find you under contempt, correct?
On the advice of my counsel, I
Okay.
invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
All right. Thank you for that. Based on the documents we received, the Bank of Saipan paid Nonstop Corporation for marketing services and expenses from August 8, 2022 to November 28, 2022. Is that statement correct?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Travilla. Cam, Exhibit 22, please. And based on the sorry, give me a second. Thank you, Mr. Travilla. And based on the documents we receive, Nonstop Corporation was paid a total of $323,415.29 for these marketing services and expenses. Is this amount accurate?
On the advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
On August 11, 2022, check number 10885 was issued in the amount of $25,000. September 6, 2022, check number 10922, a check was issued to you for $24,900. On September 26, 2022, check number 10976, another check was issued to you for $25,000. On October 14, 2022, check number 11035 in the amount of $2,542. On October 14, 2022, check number 11037 in the amount of $4,316.80 was issued to you. Again, on October 14, 2022, check number 11034, check amount $6,835.20. Again, on October 14, 2022, check number 11036, $3,499 was issued to you. Again, on October 14, 2022, check number 11033, the same amount, $3,499. October 20, 6 days later, check number 11041 in the amount of $35,000 was issued to Nonstop. On the same day, check number 11040 in the amount of $15,912 was issued to Nonstop. On November 4, 2022, check number 11082 in the amount of $33,103.29 was issued to Nonstop. On January, and I'm not sure if this is a typo, but do we have this check number with us? No, January 1st, 2022. I think that should be a typo. I think that should read November, but can we just double check that later on? Another check was issued to you in the amount of $18,356. On November 14th, 2022, check number 11098 in the amount of $24,900 was issued to Nonstop. Mr. Travilla, on December 2nd, 2022, check number 1130 in the amount, sir, of $552 was issued to Nonstop Corporation, totaling within the 3 months of your contract, $323,000, $415.29. Now, sir, you could imagine why you are here. Am I right?
On the advice of my
Of course.
counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and respectfully decline to answer your question.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Flores. With that, is there any further? None. We'll take a short recess. Oh, before we take that recess, Chair recognizes the Vice Chair.
Thank you. Before we move on to recess, Mr. Travilla and your legal counsel, Mr. Hori, if there's ever a time that you would like to talk with this committee and we could move to an executive session where you can talk with us without anybody listening except this committee and our councils and LAs, I just want you to know that that is on the table to discuss certain things, and I want you to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. With that, we'll take a 5-minute recess and we'll get back. members, and we are back. I believe that's the whole line of questions that we have for Mr. Trivilla. With that, and I recognize Rep. Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, thank you, Mr. Travilla, for appearing. At this time, I hereby move to find Mr. Robert Travilla in contempt in violation of 1 CMC 1306. He has repeatedly been asked a question and a line of questions and has repeatedly refused to testify under oath. Failure to respond is in violation to Section 1306A. I further move that the special committee transmit a report to the House and have Speaker Villagomez send a statement of contempt to the CNMI Attorney General for further prosecution in the CNMI Court of Law. So move.
Thank you, Rep. Marissa. And before I recognize that motion, recognize Rep. Probst. Members, okay, I think it. If there's no objection, we would, before we discuss the motion, we'll go to recess and we'll come back at 2:30. Is there any objection to that? Okay. Mr. Travilla, Council, is that okay? 2:30? And I believe we're going to continue with your other client.
Wait.
All right, short recess. And I understand there was a motion. I didn't recognize the second. And just to be clear, there was no motion unless you want the. Just to be clear, I'll recognize Rep. Flores to withdraw the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like to withdraw my motion at this time. Thank you so much. I yield.
Thank you, Representative Marissa. And with that, I'll now recess to 2:30 p.m. Thank you.